Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskys has acknowledged a tense situation on the eastern front lines, with troops suffering from battle fatigue and running low on weapons and equipment. The president estimates Ukraine has only a quarter of the air defences it needs to counter Russian missile attacks. He also lashed out at Western allies, warning their indecision is contributing to the critical situation.
We are in a nonsense situation where the West is afraid that Russia will lose the war, and it doesn't want Ukraine to lose it. Because Ukraine's final victory will lead to Russia's defeat, and the final victory of Russia will lead to Ukraine's defeat. And here we are with you right now, in such a moment and such a challenge for everyone.
Zelenskyy has been visiting the eastern region of Kharkiv, which sits on the border with Russia and has faced intense bombardment by Russian troops in recent weeks. The country's new conscription law comes into effect today, lowering the age of conscription from 27 to 25 in a bid to boost manpower. Exhausted troops on the front lines are hoping for a break and for more weapons to hold Russia back.
Along the border with Russia, Ukrainians are fleeing for their lives. Attacks on the town of Vovchansk have escalated. Russian soldiers have arrived on some streets.
There's constant shelling. A lot of missiles hit last night, and several rockets flew over. It's dangerous to stay here, so residents are advised to evacuate. Just yesterday we had 2 dead and 15 wounded in Russian shelling.
The town is around 75 kilometers from Kharkiv, Ukraine's second biggest city, which is being bombed by Russia almost every day. President Zelensky says Western allies must strengthen Ukraine's anti-missile capabilities.
We need at least 7 Patriot air defense systems. I won't say what we have in addition to those systems, but I believe that we have only about 25% of the air defenses we need.
Ukrainian troops are being spread thin along the front line. Those in the Donetsk region are short on manpower and awaiting fresh help.
The situation is complicated. We work day and night. We're short on ammunition and we're trying to save as much as we can.
President Zelensky says Russian troops advance between 5 and 10 kilometres inside Ukraine's northeastern border before being stopped by defending forces. He warns Russia's offensive could come in several waves and that the push for Kharkiv is just the first.
Let's bring in DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert. Konstantin, what has changed for the Russians on the battlefield?
Well, nothing dramatic, Monica, but if you consider the fact that northern outskirts of Kharkiv are only 26 kilometers from the border with Russia, pretty much every single village, every single square kilometer that the Russian forces capture brings them closer to Kharkiv. And although Putin has denied that he wants to storm the city, which is second biggest in Ukraine and Ukraine's former capital in the 1920s, no one really can believe him because he many times said one thing and then did another. It's another question whether the Russians now have the forces and the materiel for a full frontal assault on the city, but it seems that this is at least a preparation for a possibility of such a storm.
Now, we just heard a little clip from an interview that Zelensky gave, and we heard that he said the West is, quote, afraid of both Russian and Ukrainian defeat. What do you make of his remarks?
Monica, frankly speaking, personally, and having spoken quite a lot in the last few weeks with experts, military observers in the Baltic states where I am and also elsewhere in Europe, I take the same view. I think that there is the feeling of huge indecision in the West, and the idea that Ukraine has to win against Russia is still not accepted more than 2 years after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Yes, there are definitely fears that Russia will lose, and then, as many Western analysts say, we don't know what's going to happen in Russia if Putin loses the war. But this is no argument for Ukrainians who are very short of personnel and who are very short of weapons, although the West promised them the weapons. They're still not being delivered. And even the $60 billion package that the U.S. Congress has approved a few weeks ago, it will take time before weapons under this package, basically bought or transferred under this package, will arrive in Ukraine. And that creates, I think, an understandable feeling of frustration in Ukraine.
Right. And, well, as you mentioned, I mean, this lack of equipment, lack of weapons, the fatigue, lack of morale, if you like. How is all of that playing into the hands of Russia?
Well, it does, because everything that, for example, the Ukrainian authorities are now saying about mobilization, about drafting more men into the army, definitely is a very public sign of a shortage of personnel. I wouldn't say desperation, but definitely signs of worry. And this creates more momentum for Putin, who can say, well, you still have to talk to me because I'm winning this war. And this, I'm afraid, will have an impact on both public opinion and Western decision makers. And this is what I think Zelenskyy, in his interview, proved to be concerned about.
All right. DW Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert there for us. Thank you so much, Konstantin.
Thank you.
And for some analysis, let's bring in Marina Miron from the War Studies Department at King's College London. Good to have you with us. Let's start with the situation in the Kharkiv region. How exposed is Kharkiv at the moment?
Good morning. Well, it seems like the offensive has slowed down in Kharkiv region, and the Russian forces claim to be controlling the north of Vovchansk up to the Vovcha River, which divides the city, and the Russian flanks, the right flank, is well protected by Seversky Donets. So it's right now what I think will be happening is that the Russian forces will try to cut off Vovchansk from the east in order to create a cauldron for the Ukrainian forces. But I don't think that it will be as fast as the initial stages of the offensive. And we're also seeing some movements and pressure along Chasiv Yar. We're seeing movements on Ocheretiny next to Avdiivka. So the Russians are trying to push along multiple axes in order to overstretch Ukrainian capabilities.
Now, we heard the Ukrainian president just earlier accusing the West of indecision in its support, basically saying that the West isn't really clearly rooting for either Russia or Ukraine. What do you make of his remarks?
Well, I think his remarks are more of a strategic signaling, and it's not the first time that President Zelenskyy goes out to criticize the West for lack of support. The first time was actually in March 2022. So these announcements by Zelenskyy are quite frequent, and I think that this one is directed also at his domestic auditorium in order to show that the political leadership is not giving up, and it is a cry for help. But in a sense, the situation inside Ukraine with the mobilization law, with the lack of troops and lack of ammunition and military equipment is very dire. So he's trying to show that Ukraine is not giving up just yet. However, whether it will have an effect on Western allies remains to be seen, because they are not doing things for many reasons, for lack of specific equipment, for lack of political imperative. So it is very difficult to criticize the West for not doing things.
You just also mentioned the mobilization law, or the new mobilization rules that actually come into effect today. What exactly do they entail?
Well, this controversial law, which has been revised many times, what essentially it does is lowering the age, the recruitment age to 25. It also introduces harsher penalties for draft dodgers, and it also changes the categories of disability for those who might be drafted, who couldn't be drafted before because of their health conditions. And the problem with this law is what it doesn't contain, and essentially doesn't contain anything on demobilization. So there is some sort of a gap, and so it's not clear when the troops will be able to go back home, when they will be rotated. And I think this is also one major point of controversy when it comes to this law.
All right, Marina Miron from the War Studies Department at King's College London. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.